Charli D'Amelio had once been the shining symbol of success in the social media world, a rising star, not only standing out on platforms like TikTok, but also with impressive advertising campaigns and long-term contracts with major brands. Charli wasn't just a celebrity. She was the embodiment of creativity, relentless effort, and a face representing youthfulness and energy. She could proudly claim that she was one of the trendsetters, not just someone who followed others. On the surface, Charli's life appeared flawless. She had a stable family, a group of friends who always stood by her, and a flourishing career. She lived in a luxurious mansion in Los Angeles, a place that was both modern and cozy. Charli often woke up early, spent time exercising before starting her day, preparing for meetings with partners, and discussing advertising campaigns. Everything seemed within her grasp, from products appearing on the big screen at international events to creating viral videos and innovative campaigns that everyone wanted to collaborate with. However, not everyone saw Charli the way she presented herself on social media. Everything changed one autumn morning when she walked into a meeting at the headquarters of the media company she had been working with for years. The people she considered colleagues, those who had been by her side, now made her rethink everything. Ethan Montgomery, the CEO of the company, a person Charli had worked closely with over the years, smiled when she entered the meeting room, but that smile quickly vanished when he began speaking. "Charli, we need to talk," Ethan said, his tone no longer friendly as it had been in the past. She sat down, feeling the tension in the air. She had been in meetings like this before, but this time felt different. Something was wrong. Ethan continued, "We appreciate everything you've done, but we've decided to go in a different direction. You will no longer be a part of the new advertising campaign." Charli felt as though she had been slapped hard in the face. All the effort she had put into building relationships, working tirelessly over the months, was suddenly invalidated by just a few words. She couldn't believe what was happening. It felt as if the ground beneath her feet had suddenly collapsed. "Thank you for everything," was all she could manage to say, even though her heart was breaking. Charli looked into Ethan's eyes, but saw no empathy or respect, only the coldness of a decision that had already been made. No explanation, no valid reason, just the suffocating silence in the meeting room, and Charli standing there, motionless, trying to keep her composure as she walked out of the room. Everything seemed to blur. The vast hallways, the sound of employees' footsteps echoing like disconnected sounds. People walked past her without looking her in the eye, no one offering comfort, no one extending a hand. Everything Charli had once considered a family now felt like a cold stone, devoid of empathy, devoid of shared experience. She was left with nothing but emptiness and the feeling of being discarded. She left the office without anyone seeing her off, without anyone congratulating her. Charli got into her car, drove out of the parking lot, and headed home. But her mind kept spinning. All the effort, all the strategies she had built were now abandoned. She looked in the rearview mirror, wondering if she had done something wrong. Had she trusted these relationships too much? Had she placed too much hope in those she thought were her friends, her colleagues? When she got home, Charli stood in front of the door, feeling empty inside. She couldn't do anything but face the truth that everything she had built had now crumbled. She felt the loneliness, the hollowness surrounding her. But in those moments, Charli also began to realize that this might not be the end. It was time to find herself again, to rediscover the reason she had started. She wouldn't let herself be buried by this failure. A spark still burned inside her, quietly but strongly. That evening, Charli sat in her office, opened her laptop, and scrolled through unread messages. An email from an old client made her stop. "We need you. Do you remember us?" Charlie felt a strange sensation in her chest, as if something still remained, a new opportunity that she hadn't yet recognized. And in that moment, she made a decision. She would start over, not just for the work, but for herself because of her belief in herself. Charlie had lost trust in those she once called friends, but she knew she couldn't let this betrayal ruin everything. She would rise again, start over from scratch, and this time, no one would erase her name again after the unforgettable shocks. Charlie went through a period of silence. She didn't know what to do, only that she couldn't keep living like this. Every morning she woke up, still feeling numb, but deep inside, there was something craving change. When she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw the woman she once admired. Instead, she saw someone full of pain and disappointment, but not a defeated person. Charlie knew she had to rise again, not for others, but for herself. The rejections and cold glances from those around her couldn't break her. More importantly, she realized that there was no place in this life for those who wanted to make friends with failure. She didn't want to be part of the so-called past, and like a natural reflex, Charlie began to act, but quietly. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. No declarations, no big meetings, or loud appearances. She simply returned to her old tasks, the unfinished projects, and began planning her next steps. Charlie spent the entire week sitting down, reviewing past campaigns. She didn't just take notes on what she had done well, but also reflected on the mistakes, the shortcomings she hadn't noticed before. She analyzed each word in the strategies, reconsidered every decision she had made, and started questioning herself. How do I avoid making these mistakes again? The early mornings, the late nights working alone in her quiet room, became Charlie's new routine. No one was there to disrupt her, no one to share with. Everything she did for herself. A week later, Charlie began reaching out to old clients. Each call, each email was sent with careful preparation. No longer the young girl with spontaneous ideas, but a strategist full of maturity. She knew she needed to show her true value, and this time, no one would take credit for her work again. The calls were brief but persuasive. Charlie constantly reminded them of her past successes, not to boast, but to prove that she was still a valuable strategist, even though she was no longer under the protection of her former company. At times, she felt exhausted, the wounds still fresh, but Charlie wouldn't allow herself to stop. The questions in her mind about whether she had the strength to start over constantly haunted her. But each time she thought of the cruelty she had faced, she grew more determined each passing day. Charlie felt herself growing stronger, no longer hurt by the rejections. Those pains had become her motivation. One morning, while preparing for a meeting with a potential new client, Charlie received a message from an old friend, someone she had worked with before at her previous company. She hadn't heard from this person in a long time. The message was simple, but it pulled her back into a world she had tried to forget. "What are you up to? I see your Luxora campaign hasn't faded away." "Huh." Charlie just smirked. She knew they were talking about the event that had caused her to leave that company, the campaign she had meticulously planned and poured her heart into. But in the end, it was stolen by others. That question felt like a reminder that she still hadn't finished her work. But this time, Charlie didn't let herself be pulled back into those old emotions. She just needed to keep trusting herself and move forward. The meeting with the potential client went well. Charlie was no longer someone from the old company, no longer someone they could easily overlook. She realized that she didn't need validation from anyone to know her worth. The decisions she made, the strategies she proposed, were not to prove anything to anyone, but because she believed in the real value she brought. After the meeting, she sat back in her office, looking out the window where the clouds drifted by, feeling a shift inside. This wasn't a move to seek revenge, but an act to regain control of her life. She no longer chased after the recognition of anyone. She only needed one thing: success. Charlie continued to work quietly, not wanting to make a fuss, not wanting anyone to know what she was doing. With every step, every decision, she was sure that she was ready to face whatever challenge came her way. But one thing Charlie knew for certain was that she was not alone in this journey, no matter who turned their back on her. The lessons she had learned would stay with her forever. Charlie could not deny that the days following her departure from the old company were truly challenging. However, with each passing day, she began to feel a power rising deep within. The mornings no longer involved facing uncomfortable questions or strange glances from former colleagues, and that sense of freedom began to feel real. Charlie started to feel a new strength gradually overtaking her. It seemed as if she was regaining the confidence and self-belief that had once been eroded by failures and betrayals. She continued working with old clients, those she had once worked closely with. Charlie no longer viewed them as the people who had once crushed her, but rather as potential partners in a long journey she was quietly rebuilding every morning. When she woke up, she no longer saw the disappointed girl in the mirror. Instead, she saw a woman determined to rise from the ruins. She knew she couldn't rebuild everything overnight, but one thing was certain: she wouldn't give up. One day, while working, Charlie received an unexpected call from one of the former directors at the company. His tone was no longer cold, as it had been before, but instead filled with worry. "Charlie, I need to meet with you. Something's happening at the company, and I think you need to know." Charlie was a bit surprised, but also sensed that something was wrong. She wasn't in a hurry, but those words stirred her curiosity. Charlie didn't think she had anything left to lose, but clearly, the silence from her old company was creating some strange ripples. A few days later, when she met the director, he shared with her the troubling situation at the company. Ethan Montgomery and the new leadership team were facing strong opposition from major partners and old clients. Not only had they lost key clients, but they were also struggling with serious issues regarding advertising strategies and restructuring. This made Charlie smile to herself. The things she had done, the strategies she had proposed and executed in the past, were now being reevaluated and facing fierce resistance from the partners she had once built relationships with. A few weeks later, Charlie continued to quietly work with her small team. Every afternoon, she worked late in the office with her loyal companions, and gradually, she noticed that the project she was building was starting to make an impact. Partners began to take notice of the campaigns Charlie and her team had rolled out. One of the brands Charlie had previously worked with, a large client, was now struggling to maintain a relationship with her old company. They wanted Charlie to return to help them navigate the crisis. That was a positive sign. Charlie began to feel that her faith was being rewarded. Every campaign Charlie worked on was not just about money or fame, but about proving to those who had betrayed her that they had made a mistake. Under the dim office lights, Charlie and her team worked tirelessly. The tense meetings, the decisive moments about strategies, everything seemed to create a momentum that couldn't be stopped. Charlie realized that when she created truly valuable strategies, every opposition only made her stronger. The opinions of others no longer mattered. She just needed to do her job right. That day, as Charlie was preparing a new strategy for a client, she received an unusual message. It was an email from someone she hadn't expected, Ethan Montgomery. The message was brief, just a few lines. "Charlie, we are facing many difficulties. I think you understand the current situation. We need to meet to discuss the possibility of collaborating again." Charlie wasn't surprised. She knew that Ethan and his team were in crisis, and reaching out to her was simply a sign of their failure. But instead of rushing to respond, Charlie left her answer within herself. She didn't need to go back there. The old company was no longer the place for her. The story continued as Charlie met Ethan in a private meeting. He looked at her with a tense expression, but there was a trace of anxiety behind it. Ethan began talking about the company's dire situation and asked Charlie for help. "Charlie, we're facing opposition from our partners, and we need you back to help restore our credibility. Everything's different now. We need your strategies." Charlie sat in silence, feeling the change in Ethan's tone. He was no longer the one who had discarded her, but someone pleading for help. But Charlie didn't rush. She knew she was in a place no one could touch. A week later, Charlie received news of the major failure her old company was facing. Not only had they lost important clients, but they could no longer maintain stability in major projects. Projects that Charlie had once planned and led were now falling into the hands of people who were not capable enough. They had made mistakes from the very first decisions, and now they were paying the price. Charlie no longer felt hatred or bitterness. She only felt relief. What she had built was now proof of her determination and intellect. Outside the window of Charlie's office, the sky began to darken. Night fell, and she felt a profound change within her. She had not only risen from failure, but had become a symbol of strong recovery. Ethan and the old company might think they were regaining control, but in reality, Charlie had reclaimed everything she deserved, and no one could take that away from her. Charlie had gone through many weeks filled with difficulty and challenges, but now she began to feel noticeable changes within herself. Resilience and patience gradually replaced sadness and disappointment. She had rebuilt everything from scratch, without regret, without stopping. Each day, her steps grew firmer, and now she was no longer just a woman recovering from failure. She was a strategist standing on the brink of a major comeback. Every morning, Charlie no longer felt tired or anxious. She knew that everything would fall into place the way she had hoped, but it was these thoughts that made her realize something. Her life had completely changed. Betrayal was no longer just pain. It had become the driving force pushing her forward. Charlie no longer needed validation from anyone, nor did she need the approval of those who had turned their backs on her. The strategies she was building weren't to prove anything to anyone, but simply to show herself that she could do it. Things began to change one late afternoon when Charlie received a call from an old partner she had worked with on the Lexora campaign. The person, Max, had once been a trusted colleague at her previous company, but now he had left and started working with a competing firm. Charlie wasn't surprised to see his name on the call, but she knew this wasn't a random call. Max spoke quickly. "Charlie, I need you. I know I'm not the person you used to trust, but I have no way out. We need you." Max didn't say more, but those words were enough for Charlie to understand that everything was about to change. She didn't rush to respond, despite the curiosity stirring within her. She didn't want to let emotions influence her decision. Charlie took a few moments to calm her thoughts before calling Max back. She wasn't someone easily swayed, but this time, things felt different. Charlie knew she had enough strength to return, but she also understood that this opportunity wasn't about revenge. It was about proving her true worth. Finally, Charlie agreed to meet Max. The meeting took place in a small cafe, where the warm light blended with the quiet ambiance. Max looked into Charlie's eyes, and he didn't need to say much. His story was simple, but meaningful. We're struggling. Ethan and the old team have made unforgivable mistakes, and now we need a new strategy. Can you help us? Max didn't hide the urgency in his voice. Charlie didn't answer immediately, but she looked at Max, no longer seeing the former colleague, but someone who had learned to view things from a deeper perspective. You know I'm no longer part of them, Charlie said, her gaze cold, but her voice calm, carrying an unshakable strength. And I'm not coming back for money or fame. If we're going to collaborate, we'll start from scratch, from real values. Max simply nodded, without objection. Charlie knew this was her opportunity to reaffirm her own worth, to leave the past behind and build a more solid future in the days that followed. Charlie began mapping out a clear plan for her return. She wasn't in a rush, wasn't making a lot of noise. She simply prepared each step quietly. She reconnected with old clients she had worked with before, but this time, everything was being built on a stronger foundation. Charlie wasn't just selling strategies. She was selling real value, the kind she had learned from her past failures. The meetings with new partners, the strategic discussions. Every step Charlie took left a distinct mark. She no longer felt the tension or anxiety she had before. With every decision, she felt the confidence and strength growing within herself. People around her began to see her differently. They no longer viewed Charlie as someone who had been discarded, but as a winner, a creative strategist everyone wanted to collaborate with. A month later, Charlie had a complete strategy ready for a major company in the advertising industry. This was the biggest project she had ever worked on, and this time, she wouldn't let anyone take credit for her work. Charlie began to realize that the silence, the persistence in her actions, had helped her move from failure to success. Everything had changed, but she was the one who had created that change. This transformation wasn't just in her work, but also in how she saw herself and the world around her. Charlie no longer feared betrayal. She knew that if she persisted, if she kept her faith in herself, every challenge would become an opportunity to rise. As Charlie stood atop her new victories, she felt as though she had just emerged from a long nightmare. Everything had changed, not only in her work, but also in the way she saw the world around her. No more betrayal, no more relationships where she had to sacrifice herself. She had not only overcome the challenges, but was now proving she could do much more. She didn't confront anyone directly, but the results she achieved spoke for themselves. Charlie no longer needed to prove herself to anyone. After every successful campaign, both old and new clients began to see her as a reliable strategist. Major brands started seeking Charlie not just for her reputation, but because her strategies were truly effective, unlike before, when her work had been claimed by others. Now she could confidently say that every success belonged to her and her team. One afternoon, Charlie received a call from someone from her past, Ethan Montgomery. He wasn't calling to check on her. He was asking for advice. The change in his tone was unmistakable. Ethan was no longer the arrogant man who once thought he could easily get rid of her. His voice trembled, a slight urgency revealing his anxiety. Charlie, I need your help. Everything's falling apart. I don't know what to do anymore. Charlie didn't rush to respond. She looked at her phone, feeling a strange, unfamiliar sensation. She didn't feel hatred or anger, just an indescribable calm. After a brief pause, Charlie responded in a calm voice, I can't help you. You had everything when I was there, and you chose the path you thought was best. Now, it's your responsibility." She didn't need to explain further. Charlie knew that everything she had done, the strategies she had created, were now leading her to success. And Ethan, the betrayer, was now facing the consequences of his own mistakes. In the weeks that followed, Charlie didn't just land new contracts, but also began rebuilding her personal brand. The advertising campaigns she launched started gaining significant attention from the public. Every new project she took on became more prominent and unique. Charlie was no longer just an ex-employee of her old company. She was a distinct brand, respected and highly regarded. Meanwhile, Ethan and his team were facing the downfall of their company. The mistakes they had made were starting to show, and clients no longer trusted them as they once had. The company began losing major contracts, and key partners were leaving one by one. Ethan couldn't do anything to turn things around. One morning, Charlie opened her email and saw a notification. Her old company, under Ethan's leadership, had officially withdrawn from a major campaign she had once worked on. It was the Lexora campaign, a strategy Charlie had proposed and meticulously built from the very beginning. Though she didn't say anything, Charlie could feel the satisfaction in her heart. She didn't need to do anything more. The results spoke for themselves. In the following days, Charlie sensed a shift in the air. Former colleagues began reaching out to her, not to acknowledge her achievements, but simply to seek help. But Charlie didn't feel frustrated or bitter. She had moved past it all, and now she no longer needed the approval of those who had turned their backs on her. Her victories weren't about revenge. They were simply the result of her relentless and principled efforts. Ethan, meanwhile, was trying to use Charlie's reputation to save his company. He tried to approach Charlie multiple times, but she refused every attempt. Charlie didn't need to bring anyone down to prove herself. Her successes had already made her point clear, and it wasn't just Ethan. Everyone who had once abandoned her now realized they had made a mistake. In the end, Charlie looked at what she had accomplished and felt a sense of relief. She no longer dreamed of revenge or felt the need to prove anything. Her success wasn't about putting anyone down. It was about affirming her own worth. What she had done wasn't just for fame or money, but for her belief in herself and the true values she had always pursued. And one more thing. Charlie had learned that life doesn't always go the way we want. But if we stay determined and true to ourselves, everything will fall into place when the time is right. She no longer needed validation from anyone. Her achievements had proven that sometimes. Recovery doesn't require direct confrontation. The results were powerful enough to say it all.